My parents had already laid the papers out before I sat down. They were stacked neatly on the coffee table in the living room where I grew up, the same room where my report cards used to be examined like legal evidence, where every mistake had been turned into a lesson about gratitude. The curtains were half closed. Afternoon light cut across the couch in sharp lines. Everything felt staged. "Sit," my father said, nodding toward the armchair opposite them. My mother smiled, the tight, careful smile she used when something important was about to happen. "This won't take long." I sat. The leather chair creaked under my weight, a sound I remembered from childhood. I noticed the pen placed deliberately on top of the papers. Not beside them. On top. Ready. My father slid the stack toward me. "We just need your signature." I picked up the first page out of instinct. My mother's hand snapped forward, resting flat on the paper, not aggressive, possessive. "You don't need to read it," she said lightly. "It's just formalities." I laughed once, uncertain. "What am I signing?" My father leaned back, crossing his arms. "It's for the family. You trust us, don't you?" I glanced down again, trying to catch a title, a heading, anything. My mother slid the papers an inch farther away from me. "Why are you being difficult?" she asked. "After everything we've done for you?" There it was. The sentence that had followed me my entire life. I felt my stomach tighten. "I'm not being difficult, I just want to read what I'm signing." My father's jaw clenched. "That's not how this works." Something cold settled in my chest. "Not how what works?" My mother sighed dramatically, like I was exhausting her. "Do you know how much we spent raising you?" she said. "Food, school, medical bills, clothes. We never asked you for anything back." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Until now." I looked at her. Really looked. "Are you saying I owe you money?" My father leaned forward. "We're saying this is the least you can do." I pushed the pen aside. "You're asking me to sign something I'm not allowed to read." My mother's smile disappeared instantly. "Don't twist this." "I'm not twisting anything." My father's voice dropped. "You wouldn't even be sitting in this room if it weren't for us." The words landed exactly as they were meant to. A reminder, a warning, a debt. I felt 12 years old again, standing in this same room while my father explained how much my existence had cost them. How lucky I was. How ungrateful I sounded whenever I asked questions. "I just want transparency," I said carefully. My mother laughed, sharp and humorless. "Transparency?" She shook her head. "You've been watching too much of that therapy nonsense. Families don't operate like corporations." "No," I said. "Corporations don't ask you to sign blind." My father stood up. "That was new." "You think you're smarter than us now?" he asked. "After all the sacrifices we made?" My pulse thudded in my ears. "What sacrifices?" I asked quietly. "Raising your own child?" My mother gasped, hand to her chest. "How dare you?" "I didn't ask to be born," I said. The sentence slipped out before I could stop it. The room went very still. My father stared at me like I'd just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "So this is the thanks we get?" "I'm not saying that," I replied. "I'm saying I won't sign something I can't read." My mother picked up the papers and pulled them back toward herself. "Fine," she said. "Then don't." Relief flashed through me, brief and naive. Then she added, "But don't expect us to keep supporting you." I frowned. "Supporting me how?" She tilted her head. "You know, family things, access, help." "Access," the word echoed. My father nodded. "If you walk out without signing, you're making a choice." I looked at the papers again. At the pen. At the living room that had never really been mine, just a place where I was allowed to exist conditionally. I realized then that this wasn't about paperwork. It was about control, and they were betting everything on the belief that I would still be too afraid to say no. I didn't leave right away. I sat there longer than I should have, staring at the papers now pulled back into my mother's lap, like a prize she'd won by calling my bluff. My hands were shaking, but I folded them together to keep them still. I had learned early how to look calm while my insides rearranged themselves. "You're overreacting," my mother said, soft again. "This is why we didn't want you to read it. You get emotional." Emotional. That word had been used on me so often it had lost any real meaning. It was what they called me when I asked questions, when I hesitated, when I didn't immediately agree. "I'm not emotional," I said. "I'm confused, and that's reasonable." My father scoffed. "You always do this. You complicate simple things." I looked around the living room, the couch with the plastic still on the cushions, because my mother didn't trust fabric. The framed photos on the wall, graduations, holidays, birthdays. In every one of them, I was smiling, well-behaved, presentable. Proof that they had done their job. "You invited me here," I said. "You put papers in front of me. You won't let me read them. That's not simple." My mother pressed her lips together. "We thought you were mature enough now." That stung more than I expected, because I had spent years trying to earn that label. Mature, responsible, easy. "When I was 16, I continued, my voice steadier now. "You made me sign for a student loan I didn't understand. You said it was normal. You said everyone did it." My father waved a dismissive hand. "And you got an education, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. "And I paid for it. Alone." My mother shifted in her seat. "That's different." "It's not," I replied. "It's the same pattern." The air in the room thickened. I could feel the conversation slipping out of the script they'd prepared. My father leaned forward again. "You live in an apartment we helped you get," he said. "You wouldn't have your job if we hadn't pushed you. Everything you have traces back to us." There it was, the ledger. Every meal, every ride, every roof, tallied and weaponized. "I never asked you to keep score," I said. My mother's voice sharpened. "You should have. We did." She stood up and began pacing, the papers clutched in one hand. "Do you have any idea what we gave up for you? The opportunities? The freedom? We stayed. We sacrificed. And now you're questioning us like strangers." I felt something shift then. Not anger, not fear. Clarity. "You didn't sacrifice for me," I said slowly. "You sacrificed and expected repayment." My father's face darkened. "Watch your tone." "I am," I said, for the first time. My mother stopped pacing. "If you don't sign," she said quietly, "don't bother calling us when you need help." The old panic rose in my chest. Familiar and automatic. The fear of being cut off, of losing whatever fragile safety net I thought I had. But beneath it was something else now. A question I had never allowed myself to ask. What help? I paid my own rent. I paid my own bills. I made my own life, inch by inch, while they reminded me it was borrowed. I stood up. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. My father laughed, short and disbelieving. "You think you can just walk away?" "Yes," I said. The word surprised both of us. My mother's eyes filled with tears instantly, like a switch had been flipped. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "After everything." I picked up my bag. "If this is about family," I said, "you wouldn't need secrecy." My father pointed at the door. "If you leave without signing, don't come back." I paused at the threshold, my hand on the doorframe I had leaned against so many times growing up. "Then send the papers to a lawyer," I said. "Someone neutral. Someone who lets people read what they're signing." My mother shook her head. "You've changed." I looked at them both. Really looked. At the expectation. The entitlement. The certainty that love was leverage. "No," I said. "I just stopped being scared." I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt colder, sharper, like it was cutting through something stale that had clung to me for years. Behind me, the door didn't slam. It stayed open. They were waiting for me to come back. They didn't send the papers to a lawyer. They sent them back to me. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. My father's handwriting stretched tight across the front like he was pressing too hard with the pen. No return address, no note inside. Just the documents, clipped together, the same pen tucked neatly into the fold. This time I read everything. I sat at my kitchen table for nearly 2 hours, going line by line, my coffee going cold beside me. The language was dense, deliberately so. Phrases stacked inside phrases, rights transferred, obligations assumed, liability clauses that kept going long after I thought they should end. By the third page, my hands were shaking again, but for a different reason. This wasn't about family administration or temporary authority, like they'd implied. It was a power of attorney, a broad one. Financial, medical, legal. Once signed, they would be able to act as me, access my accounts, make decisions on my behalf, bind me to debts I didn't approve. The language about revocation was vague, buried under conditions that required their cooperation. And there it was, halfway down page 6, almost hidden. A clause acknowledging reimbursement for parental expenditures incurred during upbringing. I stared at that line until the words blurred. They weren't just asking for control, they were formalizing the debt. I called my lawyer immediately. She didn't interrupt while I explained. When I finished, there was a short pause on the line. "This is extremely aggressive," she said finally, "and deeply unethical." "So I'm not imagining this," I said. "No," she replied. "You're not." She walked me through it carefully. What the document would allow, how easily it could be abused, how often arrangements like this ended with adult children trapped, financially, legally, by people they trusted. "Do not sign this," she said firmly. "I won't," I replied. My voice was steadier than I expected. When I hung up, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me. Anger, clean, focused. That evening, my mother called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail, her tone warm, conciliatory. "We sent the papers so you could look them over. See? We're being reasonable." I didn't call back. My father texted an hour later. "You're dragging this out unnecessarily." I typed, then deleted, then typed again. I had a lawyer review them. The reply came fast. "Why would you do that?" I stared at the screen. "Because you told me not to read them. Because you counted on my guilt. Because you framed love like a loan." Instead, I wrote, "Because that's what adults do." The next message was longer. "We never said it was for control. This is about protecting the family. If something happens to you, we need authority. You know how much we've invested in you." Invested. Not raised, not loved, invested. My chest tightened. Not with fear this time, but with grief. The quiet kind that comes when something you hoped wasn't true finally is. I responded once more. "I won't be signing, and I won't discuss this further without legal counsel present." There was no reply. For 2 days. Then the calls started. My aunt, a cousin I barely spoke to, a family friend who told me my parents were devastated and confused and heartbroken by my sudden distance. No one asked what the papers said. They asked why I was being so cold. On the third night, my father showed up at my apartment unannounced. I didn't open the door at first. I watched him through the peephole, standing too close, arms crossed, jaw set like he'd come to collect something owed. When I finally opened it, he didn't say hello. "You embarrassed us," he said. "You tried to take control of my life," I replied. He scoffed. "That's dramatic." I held up the papers. "You put a clause in here about reimbursement for raising me." His eyes flicked away, just for a second. "That's just legal language," he said. "No," I replied. "That's a bill." His voice dropped. "You think you can survive without us?" I met his gaze. "I already am." He stared at me, searching for something. Fear, maybe. Regret. Submission. He didn't find it. "You've always been ungrateful," he said finally. I nodded. "Then this shouldn't be a loss for you." I closed the door before he could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time it felt like release. Like something long held had finally been set down. Later that night, I shredded the documents slowly, page by page. I didn't rush it. I listened to the sound, watched the pieces fall into the bin. For the first time, I understood something clearly. They didn't raise me to be independent. They raised me to be owned. And I was done pretending not to see it. The silence that followed was louder than the shouting ever had been. For a week after I shredded the papers, my phone stayed quiet. No calls, no texts, no carefully worded voicemails pretending to be concerned. It was the kind of silence meant to punish, the kind that says you'll come back when you feel it enough. I didn't. Instead, I slept better than I had in months. That surprised me. I had expected anxiety, panic about being cut off, about what they might do next. But what I felt instead was a strange, unsettling calm, like my body had been waiting for this moment long before my mind caught up. On the 8th day, my mother broke the silence. She didn't mention the documents. She didn't mention my father showing up at my apartment. She talked about groceries, about a neighbor's surgery, about how quiet the house felt. Then, casually, like an afterthought, she said, "We're worried about you." I closed my eyes. "Worried how?" "You're isolating yourself," she replied. "That's not healthy." I almost laughed. Isolation was what I had grown up in. Being present without being heard, loved without being trusted, included only when I complied. "I'm not isolating," I said. "I'm choosing distance." She exhaled sharply. "That's not how families work." "Families don't ask their children to sign away their autonomy," I replied. Her voice hardened. "We explained that already." "No," I said. "You dismissed it." She paused. "Your father is very upset." "I know. He feels betrayed." I waited for the familiar pull of guilt. It came, but weaker now. Duller. Like a muscle that hadn't been used in a while. "I felt betrayed too," I said, "when you tried to make me sign something I wasn't allowed to read." She scoffed. "You always exaggerate?" I realized then that this conversation wasn't meant to repair anything. It was a temperature check. They were probing for cracks, seeing if the old levers still worked. They didn't. A few days later, the message changed. My father emailed me a spreadsheet. Rows, columns, numbers. At the top, estimated cost of raising child. Housing, food, education, transportation, medical expenses. A total at the bottom. 6 figures. No greeting, no explanation. Just the bill. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I was tempted, but because I was stunned by how deliberate it was. How much time they had spent itemizing my existence. I forwarded it to my lawyer. Her reply came quickly. "Do not engage. Save everything." That night, I sat on my couch, laptop closed, lights off, thinking about all the moments that had led here. Every time I'd been told to be grateful instead of hurt. Every time love had come with a reminder attached. This wasn't about money. It was about rewriting history, turning parenthood into a transaction so they could justify control. The next escalation came through the family. My aunt called, voice trembling. "Your parents are devastated. They don't understand why you're doing this." "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm refusing to do something." "Well," she replied gently, "maybe if you just signed, everyone could move on." There it was. The expectation that peace required my compliance. "Did they show you the documents?" I asked. She hesitated. "No." "Then you don't know what you're asking me to accept," I said. Silence. A cousin texted that I was breaking my mother's heart. Another suggested therapy, together. I declined all of it, because I was finally seeing the pattern clearly. Every conversation circled back to one question. Why won't you just give them what they want? No one asked why they wanted it so badly. The answer became obvious when my father sent one final message. "If you don't cooperate, we'll have to protect ourselves." Protect themselves. From their own child. That was the moment something irreversible settled into place. I replied once. "Do not contact me again unless it's through legal counsel." Then I blocked their numbers. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. And for the first time in my life, I understood that walking away didn't mean I owed an explanation. It meant I had finally paid a debt that was never mine to begin with. Blocking them felt dramatic for exactly 10 minutes. After that, it felt necessary. The first few days were disorienting. I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, expecting a message, a demand, a reminder of what I was supposedly throwing away. There was nothing. Just the low hum of my refrigerator, the sound of my own breathing, and the unsettling realization that I had never learned what quiet felt like without guilt attached to it. Then the letters started. Real ones, envelopes, stamps, my mother's handwriting again, looping and careful, like she was trying to soften the words before I ever read them. I didn't open the first one. I stacked it on the counter. Then another arrived. Then another. Different sizes, different colors, the same weight. I brought them all to my lawyer. She skimmed the return addresses and nodded. Good instinct, she said. We'll document them. Do I need to respond? I asked. No, she replied. Silence is a response. A week later, a certified letter arrived from a law office I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened as I signed for it. Old reflex. Old fear. Inside was a notice. Carefully worded, vague, non-committal. It referenced family disputes and potential financial misunderstandings. No demands, no deadlines, just enough to rattle someone who didn't know better. My lawyer read it once and smiled thinly. They're fishing. For what? I asked. For you to panic, she said. For you to engage. I didn't. The funny thing was, without the constant pressure, my life didn't fall apart. It didn't even wobble. I went to work. I paid my bills. I made dinner. I slept. The world didn't collapse just because I stopped playing my role. What did change was how my body reacted to things. I stopped bracing when my phone buzzed. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head. I stopped measuring my choices against an invisible ledger of what I owed. That was when the anger finally arrived. Not explosive, not loud, clear. I started remembering things I'd normalized for years, how my parents had opened my mail by accident, how they'd insisted on being listed on my accounts just in case, how every boundary I'd tried to set had been treated like an insult. This wasn't new behavior. It was just the first time they'd put it in writing. One evening, I sat down and wrote everything out, not to send, just to see it all in one place. The phrases, the patterns, the threats dressed up as concern. When I finished, I understood something that made my chest ache in a way that wasn't entirely painful. If I had signed those papers, they wouldn't have stopped. Control never stops at one document. Debt never gets fully repaid. People who believe they own you don't give ownership back. A mutual friend reached out around that time. Someone neutral. Someone I trusted enough to answer. They're really struggling, she said gently. They don't understand why you're cutting them out. I didn't cut them out, I replied. I stepped away from something unsafe. She hesitated. They say they were just trying to help. Help doesn't require secrecy, I said. Help doesn't come with a bill. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, I didn't know it was that bad. Neither had I. Not fully. That weekend, I changed my emergency contact, updated my beneficiaries, removed every trace of their access from my life. It was tedious work. Forms, calls, confirmations, but it felt grounding. Like locking doors I hadn't realized were open. When I finished, I sat back and cried. Not because I missed them, because I finally felt safe. The last message I ever received from my father came through a new email address. You'll regret this when you realize how alone you are. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it, because I wasn't alone. I had myself. I had clarity. I had the knowledge that my life wasn't a balance sheet. And for the first time, I understood something simple and radical. Raising a child is not a favor. Love is not an investment. And freedom is not something you earn by obedience. It's something you take back when you realize it was never theirs to give. The months that followed didn't feel dramatic. They felt quiet in a way that forced me to notice things I'd spent years avoiding. Without my parents' constant presence, without the expectation that I would report, explain, justify, my days slowed down. Not because there was less to do, but because I wasn't performing anymore. I made choices without rehearsing how I would defend them later. I bought things because I liked them, not because they were responsible. I said no without immediately following it with an apology. That took practice. At first, the guilt came in waves. I'd hear my mother's voice in my head when I rested instead of working late. My father's when I questioned my own competence. Years of conditioning don't disappear just because you recognize them. But awareness changed how long the guilt stayed. Instead of swallowing it, I let it pass. Around that time, I started therapy. Not because someone told me to, because I finally had the space to hear myself think, and I didn't want to waste it. The therapist didn't tell me what I already knew. She helped me name it. Enmeshment, conditional love, parentification disguised as sacrifice. Hearing those words didn't hurt, it clarified. One afternoon, she asked me, "What do you think would have happened if you'd signed those papers?" I didn't hesitate. They would have asked for more. She nodded. "And if you'd refused later?" "They'd have said I'd changed," I replied. "That I was ungrateful. That something was wrong with me." "And now?" she asked. I thought about it. "They say the same things, but I'm not trapped." That realization stayed with me. I ran into my mother unexpectedly at a grocery store one evening. We stood on opposite sides of the produce aisle, both frozen for a moment like we'd stepped into the same memory by accident. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Tired. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. We talked about nothing. Weather. The price of fruit. Neutral territory. She didn't mention the papers. I didn't mention the silence. As I turned to leave, she said, "We just wanted to make sure you were taken care of." I met her eyes. "You could have done that by trusting me." She didn't answer. Walking away, I felt something close. Not to closure, but to acceptance. She might never understand. Or maybe she did. And understanding just didn't change what she wanted. Either way, I didn't need it anymore. The lawyer called a few weeks later to tell me the certified letters had stopped. No new filings, no follow-ups. Whatever strategy my parents had been considering, they'd abandoned it. Not out of remorse. Out of resistance. They had finally realized they couldn't move me. Life filled the space they left behind. Friends who didn't require loyalty tests. A job that valued my input without demanding my silence. Evenings that belonged to me alone. I started to understand how much energy I had spent managing their emotions, anticipating reactions, smoothing edges, preemptively shrinking. Without that constant drain, I felt lighter, more present, more myself. Sometimes people asked if I missed them. I answered honestly, I miss who I thought they were. That usually ended the conversation, because the truth was, the people who had asked me to sign those papers weren't confused parents trying to help. They were people who believed love entitled them to ownership. And the moment I refused to participate, the illusion broke. Not loudly, not publicly, but completely. The final shift didn't come with a confrontation. It came on an ordinary Tuesday standing in my kitchen, when I realized I hadn't thought about my parents all day. Not in anger, not in guilt. Not even in defense. They simply hadn't been part of my internal conversation. That was when I knew it was over. Not the relationship exactly. Relationships can linger in strange forms. But the control. The invisible grip that had shaped my decisions long before I understood it was there. I used to believe closure was something other people gave you. An apology. An explanation. A moment where everyone finally admitted what happened. Now I understood closure was something you took the moment you stopped asking for permission to move on. Months later, a distant cousin mentioned, carefully, that my parents told people I had cut them off, that I was cold, that I had chosen money and lawyers over family. I didn't correct it. People who needed that version of the story would never be persuaded by facts, and people who knew me didn't need convincing. I built a life that didn't require leverage to function. My friendships were quiet and mutual. My boundaries were boring and firm. I learned the difference between privacy and secrecy, between autonomy and isolation. One evening, while organizing old files, I came across a childhood photo. Me at 6 years old, standing between my parents, smiling too hard. I stared at it longer than I expected. That child didn't owe anyone anything. Not rent, not loyalty, not repayment for being kept alive. I wished I could tell them that. But instead, I lived it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The moment my parents tried to legally bind me to them was the moment they lost any claim they might have had emotionally. They turned love into paperwork, and paperwork has rules. Rules protect people who read before they sign. I never heard from them again directly. No final letter, no dramatic apology, just distance that calcified into permanence. And that was fine, because what I gained in return was something they never intended to give me: ownership of my own life. They asked me to sign papers I wasn't allowed to read. They reminded me how much I owed them for being raised. And in doing so, they taught me the most important lesson I'd ever learn. Love that keeps score isn't love. Sacrifice that demands repayment isn't sacrifice. And family that requires blind obedience isn't family. I didn't walk away angry. I walked away clear. And that clarity, earned the hard way, has been worth more than anything they ever thought I owed them.